Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing about the determinants of PES. That is all those factors that could potentially affect price elasticity of supply. Now I've added a few things to the digital notes file. Make sure that you guys go through it yourself. Now, as far as determinants of PES are concerned, these are those factors that could potentially influence supply. Now, when you talk about the elasticity of supply, I also mentioned that in the previous video as well, that when you're talking about elasticity, we are referring to the response of the producer. So either the response could be a quick response or easy and quick response, and that is actually what makes supply elastic. So, whenever you're thinking about elasticity of supply, always think in terms of the producers or the firm's response, and the response has to be quick and timely and easy, right, for the producer to ramp up production or increase production. And so it's always in the best interest of the producer to have an elastic supply, right? So the factors that could actually, sort of determine whether your supply would be elastic or inelastic, one very important factor is your time period. Now, guys, obviously, being an examiner, the things that really bother me when it comes to checking is that when students are explaining these factors, and when they sort of end up writing about the short run, they say in the short run supply is inelastic, while in the long run supply is elastic, without really explaining why. Without neither all, they don't even explain what the short run and the long run is, right? So you will not get marks. This is something that A-level examiners do not really want to hear. We all know that you guys know that supply is in itna to, this is very basic stuff. So every other guy who's giving an exam must be knowing of, obviously, that supply is inelastic in the short run and elastic in the long run. When we talk about the short run, guys, short run is a time period where your factors of production and inputs are fixed, and the only factor that is variable or that could be easily increased is labor. Firms could easily increase labor, but that's it. We assume that they could easily increase labor, but at times increasing labor might not every firm could easily increase labor as well, right? But as far as the factors that are fixed are concerned, your land and capital is fixed, and that acts as a production barrier because it acts as a limit to the amount and extent to which you can increase, and the easiness and the quickness to which you can increase production. So in this short run is a time period where your factors of production, your inputs are fixed, such as land and capital is fixed, and producers don't really have, and the only factor that they could rely on is labor, right? But you see, labor. There's a limit to which you can increase production based on labor because of just using more labor. So producers have limited time in the short run. Producers have limited time to adjust their production, because inputs are fixed. So and some firms might not have enough time to hire additional workers, or right. So again, that is why we say that production is inelastic in the short run, right? So although yes, you could hire more workers, but then not every firm could hire more workers. So even if you're assuming that we could hire more workers, although in theory we could hire more workers in the short run, because in the short run labor is the only variable factor. So we could hire more workers, but then again, your production cannot just rely on workers, right? At one point in time, there's a limit to the extent of workers you can hire over your fixed factors, and we already know that how diminishing return sets in beyond a certain point. And so your supply that makes production and producers not really able to increase production to the extent that they could have had there been more land and capital available, and that's what makes supply inelastic, right? So this is what you are supposed to write, and this is exactly how you are supposed to write. Also remember, and so basically also remember that when we talk about the long run, right? When we talk about the long run is a time period where where we say that in the long run your supply is elastic, and the reason why your supply is elastic is because all your factors of production are variable. But when we say that they're variable, it means that they could easily be increased, right? And when you say that, and which actually means that I've written it down for you guys as well, that producers can adjust all inputs. They can easily increase all inputs and factors of production in the long run, right? देखें अब खाली ये लिख के नहीं, अब देखें दिस इज व्हाट विल डिफरेंशिएट अ स्टूडेंट हु इज स्टैंडिंग एट अ बी और अ सी और अ स्टूडेंट हु इज स्टैंडिंग एट ए स्टार. सो ए स्टार वाला जो स्टूडेंट होगा, द स्टूडेंट हु गेट्स एन ए स्टार विल राइट 2-3 more points. He will write that not only can producers adjust all inputs, but they can even expand, their production facilities, because capital is variable in the long run, so they could expand their production facilities. And one thing that most of the students will end up missing is the third point, which says in the long run firms could either enter the industry or exit the industry. देखिए मैं आपको एक चीज बताऊं कि these entry and exit decisions are made in the long run. Whether you want to enter in industry or you want to exit from that industry, these are made in the long run. And that is again something that makes supply, elastic. And I'll tell you why. Also remember that in the long run you can adapt new technologies, and because of these technological improvements that will make your supply more elastic, because technological advancement and improvement will enable what? It will enable quicker production, right? When you automate your production or you improve your logistics, obviously through technological advancement you will be easily able to respond to higher demand and higher prices, right? Which would make your supply elastic. So this is how you need to explain, instead of just writing that in the long run supply is elastic. And that is what differentiates an A-level student from an O-level student, and also within an A-level student, this is how an A-star student would answer, right? Also remember, as far as I wanted to speak more on this entry and exit decisions, you see in the long run means that there is sufficient time for new. So when we are talking about देखिए लॉन्ग रन के और शॉर्ट रन के कुछ कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं फ्रॉम द परस्पेक्टिव ऑफ फर्म्स एंड सप्लाई. एक तो हमने डिस्कस किया दैट इन द लॉन्ग रन ऑल योर फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन आर वेरिएबल, बट देन as far as the entry and exit decisions of firms are concerned in a new industry, should we join this industry, should we close our firm and exit the industry, or if this industry is becoming quite lucrative and attractive and markets are thriving, should we enter into this industry and also start production and mobilize our factors of production into that industry? Should we do that or not? These decisions are long run decisions to be made, right? The long run is a period of time, guys, that there is sufficient time for new firms to either enter the market or for existing firms to leave the industry or the market, right? So price elasticity of supply, then guys, in the long run, what happens is that is what again makes the supply more elastic. Why? Because you see, firms could then easily respond, new firms could enter, that would help increase more production, right? Also, so for example, let's say in the long run, like I said, new firms can enter the market if the demand for the product is going up and the market is profitable, and because that when the market demand would go up, the prices would go up, and that would attract more production. But then in the long run, that would also attract new firms to enter the industry as well. But the short run, this wouldn't happen in the short run. Short run is too short for new firms to enter. It is too short for new firms to make that decision to enter an industry. But in the long run, they could enter that industry, which will again make the supply more elastic. That is why we say that the price elasticity of supply is more elastic in the long run. And also, for instance, in the long run, if the markets are declining, if the markets are unprofitable, if demand is falling, and that is causing prices to go down, then the reason why in the long run supply could easily go down following a fall in prices, because some firms might easily exit the industry as well in the long run, right? So possibly short run mein, if the prices are going down, the existing firms might reduce production in the short run, but they won't have sufficient time to sort of make that exit decision. But in the long run, they will have that time available for themselves and they will exit, and that will again make supply more. In terms of industry output, it just makes it more flexible and a quick response in the long run, because when the demand falls and the prices are going down, so in the long run, if they exit, that would again cause the supply to go down, the quantity supplied would go down by a quite large extent, making supply elastic. So because you see, firms need time to exit the market, right? If the demand is falling and the prices are falling. So that is why we say that supply is, more elastic in the long run. So these are the points that you need to write when you are explaining the time period that is the long run and the short run, right? Also remember the second point that basically affects your price elasticity of supply is, so is basically your substitutability of your factors of production, right? Acha, one more thing. Also remember that in the long run, like I think I don't remember that I mentioned this point earlier or not, but in the long run, producers will have enough time to adjust their production levels as well. So price adjustment is not only they can't so they can easily adjust factor of production as well. They could easily increase that, and that would also help the producers to adjust the production level. So you could say that in the long run, supply is elastic because of more flexibility of output or more flexibility of the suppliers to increase production, or production itself is more flexible in the long run, right? Where industries could or firms could ramp up production up or down very quickly, making the supply more elastic in the long run, guys. Now the second point, substitutability of factors of production, this talks about, so you see, substitutability of the factors of production means that, for example, let's say if I am teaching economics, then I can only teach economics, right? You can't use me to teach math or accounts or business or maybe physics, right? So in that context, that makes me not less substitutable or not substitutable at all, in fact. But some factors of production are substitutable, and if the more substitutable they are, the more elastic the supply is. So the more the substitutable the factors of production are for a firm, the easier it is for them to respond. Dekhe, again, while explaining elastic supply, easier and quicker for them to respond. Easier and quicker for them to respond. Ye words you will use when you are explaining elastic supply. So the easier it is for them to respond to changes in demand and price, right? देखें यहाँ पे supply का response जो है ना वो price पे तो है, but why is price going up? If you are saying that producers are increasing output in response of higher price, but if you're saying that supply is elastic and producers are increasing output in response to higher price, the point is why on earth is the price going up? It's going up because of more demand, because the demand is going up. That is the primary driver of increasing price, right? So if you're saying that what happens is that the more substitutable your factors of production are, the easier it is for firms to respond to higher demand and prices, right? Right? So again, for instance, जैसे अगर मैं आपको example दूं, that let's say if a firm is producing, let's say if the firm is producing cars and let's say it's also producing cars and trucks, right? Or cars and vans. Now, if the demand and hence the price of vans go up, making it a profitable market, and if the factors of production are substitutable for this particular firm, such as let's say labor and land that is currently being used is substitutable. So the labor and land that is currently producing cars can easily be transferred to producing vans instead, which will again increase the supply of vans easily. So that makes the supply of vans elastic because the factors of production are substitutable. That is, they are more mobile. So the more mobile your factors of production are, the more mobile they are, the more geographically and occupationally mobile they are. If you guys remember, we studied geographical and occupational mobility in chapter 1. You can go through those definitions from your register. So the more geographical and occupationally mobile they are, the more substitutable they automatically become. And the less mobile they are, the less substitutable they become. And the more mobile or the more substitutable they are, the more elastic the supply is, right? So supply for products, remember that supply for products where factors of production can easily be substituted to producing other, so supply of the firms where businesses have those factors of production that they can easily substitute, right, to producing that particular product. They can use other factors of production to producing this particular product because their factors of production are mobile. I can easily deploy land and labor and capital to this particular product from other products because it is more substitutable and mobile, both geographically and occupationally. So in this sense, if the price of the good would increase, the supply would be elastic, and in this case, the businesses could easily respond to producing and increasing more output and quantity supplied, and so the quantity supplied would relatively rise by a greater extent than the rise in price, making the supply more elastic, right? So the more substitutable and the more geographically and occupationally mobile the factors of production are, the more easy it is, right? So yeah, this is one thing. And अगेन इसको आप लेबर फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी भी लिख के आ सकते हैं एग्जाम में, मतलब अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट अनदर वर्ड दैट यू कुड यूज इज लेबर फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी, द हाउ इजीली लेबर कैन मूव, और labor mobility, how easily labor can move between either different between different tasks, right? Is what would make your supply more elastic or less elastic. If they can't really move that easily between different tasks, then that would make your labor occupationally less mobile, right? So guys, what we conclude is that the more easily and the quickly resources could be, or factors of production could be shifted out of, let's say, one line of production into another, or in other words, they're more substitutable, then the greater would be the responsiveness of quantity supply to changes in prices, right? अब इसकी जैसे you could also give the example of a farm worker. If a farm worker, you can, for example, if I have a land and the farm worker, I can quickly move the farm worker to cultivating, let's say, from apples to cultivating oranges. So now in this case, the farm worker is highly mobile, right? And if I want to ramp up the production of oranges, then I can maybe sort of ask him to work on the oranges field rather than the apples field. So again, you can easily move the farm worker from apples to oranges, and so that would make your factors of production easily substitutable in this particular context. But obviously you can't ask the farm worker to, you can't easily make him to sort of move to car production, obviously. So in this case, obviously that labor is immobile, right? Occupationally immobile, right? Or maybe less substitutable, or in fact not substitutable at all, right? So this is again another factor that basically determines your elasticity of supply. Now another point that you need to know is the level of spare capacity. Spare capacity का मतलब होता है idle capacity, वो capacity जो कि अभी यूज़ नहीं हुई भी होती, बेसिकली आपके पास एक्सेस पड़ी हुई होती है. अब कैपेसिटी यहाँ पे हमारे पास सारे रिसोर्सेज, वो रिसोर्सेज हैं, वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट ऑल दोज रिसोर्सेज दैट हैव नॉट बीन करंटली यूज्ड and they are idle, and we will use them once the time or the demand comes, right? So if we have unused capacity, then definitely our supply would be elastic. So remember guys, that for those businesses and firms with lots of spare capacity, it is much easier for them to respond. Again, the word respond is coming. It is much easier for them to respond to changes in demand and subsequent changes in prices, because to increase production, the business then simply needs to utilize those unemployed factors of production and resources. So supply for those businesses that have large spare capacity is therefore price elastic, right? So in this sense, if the price goes up, the quantity supplied would go up by a relatively higher proportion, because producers would easily utilize that spare capacity and ramp up production. But if resources are fully employed, there's no idle capacity, then in that context your supply would be inelastic. Producers will not be able to increase production, right? So remember that producers who have idle capacity, they can respond more quickly and more easily to subsequent increase in prices. They could easily boost production. They could simply boost production without incurring the new cost of capital expansion. There's no need to incur any cost of capital expansion or open another plant or hire more machinery, because you already have machinery and labor lying idle, and you could use that, right? And what makes your supply more elastic. Now the next point that you need to know is the level of stocks, or basically when we're talking about the level of stocks, you're talking about the ability of the firm to store their stocks, basically. So do the firms have storage capacity and storage capabilities? Or for instance, if the goods could be stored inexpensively matlab you don't need a separate huge warehouse to store them without really incurring a huge sort of warehouse cost to store them. So if the firms have the capabilities to sort of store these goods without incurring significant costs, then in that case producers would be more incentivized to sort of build inventories, to sort of build those inventories or piles of stock of not only raw material but piles of stock of finished goods as well, during times when the prices and the demand is low, and they could store them as buffer stock as well, and then they could release them into the market when the prices are rising because of more higher demand, and the demand for them is going up. They could easily release it in the market and make more profits, which simply means that would make the suppliers, that would simply make the production more elastic, because the producers could easily supply in the market when the demand is high. That would make supply more highly elastic, as they could easily respond, right? Or even if they have raw material already stored with them, they could use it to quickly ramp up production, if that's how the way the business model works. But again, the main thing is that if goods, either finished goods or raw materials, could be stored inexpensively, then producers can easily build inventories of raw material or finished goods without. But if the storage cost is very very high, so it could deter basically deter businesses from holding in inventories, making supply more inelastic, right? And also यहाँ पे there's this another point that is coming in my head. You could basically also talk about here. You could, I mean, this could be connected with this point as well, that sometimes producers have very easy access to raw material suppliers, and if the raw material, which is very important, especially when you are talking about mass production, and if the raw material is readily available or easily available and can be acquired very easily, then supply is more elastic in that case, because producers can then very easily increase production without significant delays in production or without significant increase in cost. So if the यहाँ पे बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात ये भी आती है, वी शुड हैव कनेक्शंस, बिजनेसेस शुड हैव कनेक्शंस विद मल्टीपल वेंडर्स. एंड आपके एग्जाम में सवाल भी आता है दैट टू व्हाट हाउ कुड प्रोड्यूसर्स मेक द सप्लाई मोर इलास्टिक, एंड यहाँ पे यू कुड मेंशन दिस पॉइंट दैट मेक दे कुड, I mean, they should they should in fact sort of work on this, that they should have multiple contacts with raw material suppliers and raw material vendors, and somehow they should ensure that raw material is readily and easily available very easily without any delay, so that production could happen without delays or significant cost increase. Because they can urgent raw material किसी से भी मंगवाएंगे if they are, so that would probably be sold to them, or they would be able to acquire it at a very high cost, making production expensive, right? So again, these are the factors that businesses should consider. And like I said, elastic supply will always work in favor of the businesses, and it is in their best interest to make the supply, to work consciously to make the supply more elastic. And we'll in the coming videos we'll see the impact of supply on if the supply is more elastic, then, or the supply is inelastic, then what will be the impact on producer revenues and all of that. So another thing that you could sort of mention is about production lag. अब यहाँ पे देखें, सर्टन गुड्स होते हैं वो इनहेरेंटली बाय नेचर इनइलास्टिक होती है उनकी सप्लाई. फॉर एग्जांपल एग्रीकल्चरल गुड्स. नाउ एग्रीकल्चरल गुड्स जो होते हैं, एग्रीकल्चरल गुड्स, इसको प्रोडक्शन देखें, एग्रीकल्चरल, इसको आई मीन द करेक्ट इकोनॉमिक वर्ड टू यूज हियर इज प्रोडक्शन लैग, राइट? Agricultural goods, for example, they have large production lags because it makes harder for suppliers to respond. Suppliers यहाँ पे farmers हैं, to make it harder for suppliers or farmers to respond to increasing demand. Because you see, agricultural goods have a fixed sowing and harvesting period, right? And they can't sort of increase output beyond or before that certain period, right? They could somehow make use of certain technology and certain sort of chemicals to reduce that lag, but again, it will have a lag, right? So supply for such products, such as agricultural products, is therefore price inelastic. ये बात याद रखना कि agricultural goods की supply जो होती है वो inelastic होती है, उनकी production, मतलब उनकी supply is price inelastic, right? So again, so that is something that you must know. Also, यहाँ पे nature of the goods, again, something that you must be knowing. For example, goods that are perishable. अब कुछ goods perishable होते हैं, right? They have inelastic supply. For example, goods like fresh food. ठीक है, fresh food की supply जो होती है, I mean, they have inelastic supply because you can't really, and the reason being is that you can't really, I mean, you can't really store them for long periods. So in that context, it makes the supply really inelastic. But non-perishable goods जो होते हैं, they can be stockpiled, right? Non-perishable goods, इसको लिख लें आप कि ये stockpile हो सकते हैं. देखिए, words होने चाहिए आपके पास लिखने के लिए कि लिख कर क्या आना है, पेपर में क्या लिख कर आना है. अंडरस्टैंड होना एक चीज अलग बात होती है, ठीक है, आई गॉट दिस पॉइंट, बट लिख कर व्हाट डू यू हैव टू राइट, दिस इज व्हाट यू विल राइट, दैट नॉन पेरिशेबल गुड्स दे कैन बी स्टॉक पाइल्ड, which allows the firms and the producers, to sort of adjust supply more flexibly. So, guys, these are the factors that basically potentially affect supply. And I hope you understood this. And I think I'll be ending the video here. I hope to see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.